He had money, power, and the attention of the world, but in the moment he needed words the most, he had none. He arrived in Beijing like a man with the world at his feet. The billionaire CEO had conquered markets, dominated headlines, and built an empire with nothing but vision and relentless ambition. The conference hall was filled with flashing cameras, government officials, investors, and journalists waiting to witness history. Today was supposed to be the day he finalized a $500 million expansion deal with China. Years of preparation, legal negotiations, and cultural diplomacy had all come down to this moment. Everything had been arranged, except one detail that no one saw coming. His translator was gone. He looked to his left, then to his right, empty space. The woman who was supposed to guide every word between him and the Chinese delegation had simply disappeared. Phones buzzed. Assistants panicked, but time didn't stop, the audience didn't stop, the pressure didn't stop. He was expected to speak. Now, he stepped to the microphone, cleared his throat, and smiled nervously. Ni hao, he tried. The pronunciation was off, the crowd didn't respond. He chuckled awkwardly and glanced toward his team, as if hoping someone, anyone, would come to his rescue. But no one moved. No one knew what to do. His empire was built on control, but at that moment, control slipped through his fingers. He flipped through his notes, trying to find a phrase, a sentence, anything that might help. But paper couldn't save him. He was surrounded by opportunity and completely unable to speak. And that's when panic set in. The audience began to murmur. Reporters started recording. This wasn't just awkward. It was humiliating. A global CEO, frozen by a language barrier he never expected to face alone. All eyes on him, and not in the way he was used to. This wasn't power. This was vulnerability. And somewhere in the back of that echoing hall, someone was watching. A janitor, wearing blue coveralls, pushing a mop bucket, staying quiet like he always did. No one looked at him. No one ever did. He wasn't important to them. Just another man cleaning up their messes. His name was Darnell. He worked the night shift, swept the floors, and kept to himself. But Darnell had a secret. A story no one had ever asked to hear. 15 years ago, he had lived in Asia, moving base to base as the son of a military officer. He'd picked up languages like kids picked up hobbies, Mandarin, Cantonese. Japanese, it came easy to him. But after losing his parents young, life hadn't been so kind. Degrees were expensive. Opportunities didn't knock on his door, so he worked and he cleaned and he kept quiet. Because the world had a way of talking over people like him. But Darnell also listened. Every day, he passed rooms where decisions were made by men in suits. Every night, he mopped floors walked by CEO and board members. He watched how people treated power, and he saw how quickly that power crumbled the moment things didn't go according to plan. So when he saw the CEO stumbling, speechless, helpless in front of a global audience, Darnell didn't laugh. He didn't judge. He stepped forward. At first, no one noticed. Then a few security guards turned, confused as the janitor walked past them without hesitation. One even tried to stop him, but the CEO, eyes wide, desperate now, waved him through. Darnell approached slowly, respectfully. "Sir," he said softly, "I can help." The CEO blinked. "What?" "I speak Mandarin. Let me translate." For a long moment there was silence. No one knew whether to believe him. No one knew what to say, but the CEO had no other option. He handed over the paper and stepped back. Darnell adjusted the mic, took a breath, and began to speak. Fluently, clearly, calmly, he greeted the room with dignity. He explained the CEO intentions with precision. The Chinese delegation leaned forward, eyebrows raised in shock. A janitor doing what the billionaire could not. The room began to shift. Whispers turned to nods. Tension faded. The chaos quieted because words, spoken with understanding and respect, have power, and the janitor, who no one noticed, became the voice everyone listened to. He didn't walk in with a briefcase, a title, or an entourage, but when he opened his mouth, the entire room turned to listen. The moment Darnell spoke, the silence became sacred. Mandarin poured from his lips with precision, fluency, and a level of emotional clarity that startled even the most senior diplomats in the room. What the billionaire CEO couldn't say with his money, the janitor said with his heart. His voice didn't shake. His tone didn't beg. It commanded. It flowed. It translated more than just words. It delivered intention, respect, and something the audience hadn't expected: sincerity. The Chinese delegation leaned in. The lead negotiator, a stern-faced executive with decades of experience, tilted his head with curiosity. For a man in a janitor's uniform to speak their language better than most interpreters, that wasn't just rare, it was unheard of. The deal was no longer the focal point. Now, the story in the room had changed. People whispered, "Who is he? He's the janitor. Is this real?" Cameras zoomed in. Reporters clutched their notepads. The billionaire CEO, now standing off to the side, watched with disbelief as the man who mopped his halls just hours ago was now holding the attention of global power brokers. Darnell didn't flinch. He translated every point on the CEO paper with ease. But he didn't stop there. He improvised. He softened harsh business jargon into words that resonated with the Chinese officials culturally. He quoted a Confucian proverb that made one of the executives nod with approval. He bowed slightly at just the right time, not as a gesture of submission, but of understanding. This wasn't performance. This was connection, and it was real. The CEO team stood frozen. No one dared interrupt. His lead assistant whispered, "Where did this guy come from?" Another replied, "He's been here for months. Night shift. We just never noticed." And that was the truth. No one had noticed him, but in that moment, they couldn't ignore him. Darnell finished the opening remarks and stepped slightly aside to let the CEO speak again. But this time, the CEO didn't reach for the microphone immediately. Instead, he walked over to Darnell and whispered, "Can you stay up here with me?" Darnell nodded. And so, side by side, billionaire in $1,000 suit, janitor in faded coveralls, they delivered the rest of the presentation together. Darnell translated every word, but more than that, he gave the message life. The CEO's speech, once dry and corporate, now carried warmth, humility, and heart, because it was filtered through the voice of someone who had lived at the bottom and still stood tall. The Chinese executives smiled, laughed even. The room that once felt cold and tense had transformed into something almost surreal. A global business deal was being brokered by the most unexpected partnership of the year. And somewhere in the back, a reporter sent out a tweet. Billionaire CEO just saved by his janitor. Speaks Mandarin better than the translators. Crowd stunned. The post went viral before the conference even ended. As the final slide appeared on the giant screen behind them, Darnell translated the closing statement. He ended it not with a generic thank you, but with a phrase that sent chills through the room. He looked directly at the delegation and said in Mandarin, "True leadership is not about position. It's about connection, and today we connected." The room stood still for a heartbeat, and then erupted into applause. Not polite applause, not mandatory applause, but real, rising, emotional applause that echoed through the hall. The deal wasn't just saved, it was elevated, and the man who had saved it wasn't wearing a title. He was wearing purpose. When the session ended, executives from both sides lined up, not to speak to the CEO, but to shake Darnell's hand. Some bowed, some spoke in Mandarin. One investor even asked, "Have you ever considered being a cultural liaison? We could use someone like you." But Darnell simply smiled. He wasn't here to chase promotions. He wasn't here for applause. He was just doing what needed to be done, what no one else could do in that moment. As the billionaire walked alongside him backstage, he said softly, "You didn't just save a deal. You taught me something I'll never forget." Darnell looked at him, calm and grounded. Sometimes it takes losing your voice to realize who's really been listening all along. He walked off that stage unknown, but by the time the world caught up, his name was everywhere. Because true greatness never stays in the shadows for long, the conference ended, the crowd dispersed. The CEO shook hands, smiled for photos, and accepted praise that didn't fully belong to him. But the one everyone talked about as they left that room wasn't the billionaire, it was the janitor, the man no one saw coming, the voice no one expected to hear, the story no one could stop talking about. Within hours, Darnell's name was trending across social media platforms. The janitor who saved a billionaire, unexpected hero of the global conference. Who is Darnell, the man who spoke fluent Mandarin in overalls? Journalists scrambled to find out who he was. They dug through building records, security footage, HR files, and what they found shocked them. He had no formal job title beyond maintenance staff. No spotlight, no profile, no fanfare, just quiet, humble service. Every night for 2 years, he had cleaned the same building where billion-dollar deals were made. He walked past corner offices. He emptied trash bins under crystal chandeliers, and not once did anyone ever ask him his story. Until now, the CEO PR team tried to spin it. They issued a brief statement thanking Darnell for his unexpected contribution to the event, but the internet wasn't having it. Videos from the conference surfaced. Clips of Darnell standing beside the CEO, translating with poise and power. Viewers watched with disbelief. Some cried, some stood and applauded in their homes. One tweet read, "That janitor didn't just translate, he transcended." By morning, Darnell's face was on every major U.S. news network. CNN called him the unlikely voice of diplomacy. A YouTube creator posted a breakdown video titled, "Why This Janitor Just Redefined Intelligence." And within 48 hours, a petition began circulating, demanding the CEO offer him an executive role in international communications. But Darnell, he was back at work. Same hallway, same mop, same humility, because while the world was discovering who he was, Darnell never forgot who he had always been. When reporters showed up outside his building, he politely declined interviews. When TV crews asked to film his story, he simply said, "I'm just a man who stepped up when it mattered." He didn't chase cameras. He didn't crave validation. That's what made his story even more powerful. He wasn't trying to be known. He was trying to be useful. But the CEO, he couldn't ignore the truth anymore. He called an emergency board meeting, not to fix a PR crisis, but to confront a personal one. He looked around the room at his executive staff, all graduates of elite schools, fluent in buzzwords and business metrics, and he said, "We missed him. He was right under our noses and we never saw him. That's on us." He requested a private meeting with Darnell. No cameras, no press, just two men sitting across from each other. And for the first time, the billionaire wasn't speaking to an employee. He was listening to a man. "I don't know what to say," the CEO admitted. "You already said it," Darnell replied. "The night you didn't have a voice, I had one, and now people are listening." The CEO nodded, and they should have been all along. He offered Darnell a position, senior advisor for cross-cultural communication. 6 figures, full benefits, a private office, a seat at the table, but Darnell paused, because in that moment, he wasn't just thinking about the job. He was thinking about everyone like him. The people who clean offices, flip burgers, drive buses. The ones whose names are forgotten, whose talents are buried, whose voices go unheard. "I'll take the role," he said, "but only if I can build something bigger than just a title. I want to start a program for overlooked talent, people with skills, with stories, with dreams, who just need a chance to be seen." The CEO didn't hesitate. Done, and that was the beginning not just of a career shift, but of a movement, a janitor, once invisible, now reshaping how a global company saw value, because he wasn't a symbol, he wasn't a headline. He was a reminder that greatness doesn't always come dressed in suits. That fluency isn't just about language, it's about empathy, and that sometimes the most powerful voices come from the quietest corners. He used to be invisible in a hallway full of power. Now leaders across the world were calling to ask for his wisdom. They gave him a new title, a new office, a new salary, but what the world gave him was something far greater than all of that: respect. For the first time in his life, Darnell didn't walk into a room and go unnoticed. Now people stood when he entered, they listened when he spoke, they called him sir, but more importantly, they finally saw him, not as a janitor, not as a fluke, but as a man who had earned his place, not with wealth, not with privilege, but with presence. Within weeks, Darnell's story reached corporate boardrooms, college campuses, and government chambers. The internet didn't forget him. In fact, it lifted him higher. His face was on magazine covers. Headlines read, "From mop to microphone, the man who changed everything. The janitor who taught the world to listen." But Darnell never chased fame. He never leaned into the spotlight. He used it for others. The first thing he did was launch the program he'd promised. He called it Voices Unheard, a bold initiative to find hidden talent in the shadows of the workplace. Janitors, drivers, cafeteria workers, assistants, people with gifts no resume could capture. He traveled across the country meeting them, hearing them, mentoring them, and in every city he repeated the same phrase, "You are not your job title, you are your value." It wasn't just corporate America that paid attention. Schools invited him to speak to students. Tech companies offered him seats on advisory boards. One governor even asked him to lead a statewide workforce inclusion effort. The billionaire CEO who once panicked without a translator now followed Darnell's lead. He made cultural training mandatory at every level of his company. He changed the hiring process to look beyond degrees. And in a rare public admission, he said, "My janitor taught me how to lead." It shocked the world. But it also inspired it, because Darnell wasn't just rewriting his story. He was reshaping the way people thought about others, about leadership, about value. One day, Darnell received an envelope, hand-delivered, embossed with gold trim. Inside was an invitation. "You are cordially invited to deliver the keynote address at the Global Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. That year, the stage was set for presidents, tech billionaires, world-class economists, and Darnell. He stood in front of a room filled with the world's most powerful people. But he didn't tell them what they expected to hear. He didn't preach. He didn't boast. He told the truth. "I was a janitor," he said. "I cleaned your buildings while you made decisions inside them. I mopped the floors where people in $10,000 suits walked right past me. And the day I finally spoke wasn't the day I became valuable. It was the day someone finally realized I always was." The crowd didn't blink. You could hear breathing. You could feel hearts breaking open. "I didn't climb a ladder," he continued. "I broke through a ceiling, and the truth is, there are millions like me. You call them ordinary, but they carry extraordinary wisdom. The question isn't if they exist. The question is, will you see them?" That night, his speech became the most shared video in Summit history. But while the world celebrated his rise, Darnell still went home to the same neighborhood, still visited the same diner on Fridays, still helped his neighbor carry groceries upstairs. Because to him, greatness wasn't about how far you climbed. It was about how many you lifted on your way up. And one day, as he walked through his old building, the same hallway he once swept, a young intern passed him and said, "Sir, I hope one day I can be like you." Darnell smiled gently and replied, "Don't wait to be seen. Speak when your heart tells you to. The world listens to truth, even if it comes from a broom closet." He kept walking, slow and steady, shoulders straight, heart full. He had started as the quietest man in the room, but now he was leading the world, one unheard voice at a time. Some moments fade, but this one, it rippled across the world and rewrote what humanity called success. Years had passed since that unexpected day in Beijing, but people still remembered, not the conference, not the billionaire, not the business deal. They remembered the janitor, the man who stood up when everyone else froze, the voice that translated more than language. He translated hope. Darnell's legacy had become more than a story. It had become a symbol, a movement, a reminder to every forgotten soul that greatness isn't reserved for the spotlight. Sometimes it's born in the shadows, quiet, patient, and powerful. Across America, companies began reevaluating how they hired, how they listened, how they treated the people who kept their buildings running. A ripple became a wave. Voices unheard, chapters opened in every major city. Career doors opened for the overlooked. Hidden resumes were dusted off. Untapped brilliance was finally brought to the surface. In schools, kids wrote essays titled, "I Want to Be Like Darnell." In libraries, his story was placed under modern legends. One sculpture garden in Chicago even built a life-size bronze statue of him. Mop in one hand, mic in the other. The plaque read, "He didn't wait to be chosen, he chose to rise." But the most powerful moment of all came years later, when the CEO, now older, retired, and far humbler than before, invited Darnell to speak at his final farewell event. The ballroom was filled with suits, leaders, politicians, and CEO from around the globe. But when Darnell entered the room, everyone stood. He took no stage. He needed no podium. He just walked to the center of the floor and began to speak. "I wasn't supposed to be here," he said. "Not according to society, not according to systems. I was told to stay in my lane, to be quiet, to clean up and move on. But that's the lie, isn't it? That our worth is measured by what's written on a name tag or the title on a paycheck." He paused, scanning the crowd. They weren't just listening, they were learning. "I was never just a janitor," he continued, "and you're not just a CEO. We're people, human beings, and every human being has a voice. What matters is whether we listen." The CEO wiped a tear from his eye. For a man who had once built an empire on confidence and control, it was this janitor, this friend, who had taught him the most. After the event, they walked outside together, away from cameras, away from attention. Two men, one journey, both changed. The CEO looked up at the sky and said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stepped forward that day?" Darnell smiled softly, "Every day, and then I remind myself it wasn't courage that pushed me. It was responsibility." The billionaire nodded. "You didn't just save my deal, you saved my soul." They stood in silence, and then, as the CEO turned to leave, Darnell called after him one last time. "You built a company," he said, "but what we built together was bigger. We built a reason for others to believe again." And with that, they parted ways, not as janitor and CEO, but as two men who learned how to see each other. And through that simple act of recognition, they changed how the world would see everyone else. In the years that followed, Darnell continued to speak, to teach, to lead, but never once did he let the world forget where he came from, because he knew, the second you forget your roots, you lose your power. His final message, printed on classroom walls, echoed through boardrooms and burned into the hearts of a generation. The world doesn't need more powerful people. It needs more powerful listeners, because sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one holding the answer. But what no one saw coming was what he did next, because just when the world thought they knew his story, just when they believed the janitor had already changed everything, he disappeared from the spotlight. No interviews, no speeches, no explanations. One morning, his office was empty, his chair untouched, his nameplate still shining on the door, but he was gone. Some say he's in a small town, helping a young boy find his voice. Others whisper he travels anonymously, showing up in quiet places where silence needs a champion. And some believe he's simply waiting for the next room, the next heart ready to speak, the next soul brave enough to rise. Wherever he is, one thing remains certain: he didn't vanish, he moved quietly to change the next world. He was never just a janitor. He was the voice the world forgot to listen for.